Welcome to a special edition of the 25th Hour with your hosts, Bianca Ford and Alyse Adamson.
Welcome back to the 25th Hour. I'm Bianca.
And I'm Alyse, and we are your favorite pair of legal besties entering your chat and here to break down the issues of today.
This is where law meets life and culture and everything in between. So, Alyse, what is on your mind today?
Well, girl, let's think. I mean, there's been a lot going on this week. I think what I've been watching is a lot of the back and forth about Karine Jean-Pierre's new book titled Independent. And of course, Karine Jean-Pierre is the former White House press secretary under former President Joe Biden. I mean, she was there through the thick of it, including the disastrous 2024 election. And I think her book takes swipe at some of Biden's inner circle and at the Democratic establishment for what she says is abandoning former President Biden. But that is not what I'm listening to. I'm listening to a lot of the haters go after Ms. Jean-Pierre, saying she don't actually know how to communicate, that the book may make a little sense. It lacks internal logic, but her press tour is a disaster and she's not making any sense. I think the New York Times said that she was engaging in word salad discussion or answers to really kind of simple softballs about her book. And then Katie Miller, who, if you haven't heard of her, I'm not surprised because she's only famous and somewhat relevant because her husband is Stephen Miller, a high-ranking Trump administration official. And she said this recently on Jake Tapper's show on CNN.
You're seeing, and what Karen is attesting to, is that she is quite incompetent to do the job, right? This is what Republicans have been saying for years now, is that she is just another evidence that DEI doesn't work, whether that's in the White House in your press secretary role, or whether that's an air traffic controller, an air pilot, whether that's your doctor. You want to hire the best for the role.
Yeah. So, I mean, basically the same tired talking points that she must be DEI. And Bianca, before I have you react, I just want to say, Karine Jean-Pierre was an MSNBC political commentator before she got the gig. She was also the spokesperson for MoveOn.org before she got that White House speaker gig. So, it's not like they just pulled a random black chick from obscurity. I mean, all this talk about it just being because she's black and queer. Yes, she is black and queer. And yes, she does that, make it a core point of her identity and her talking points. But at the same time, it's not like she ain't do anything to put her in that position. But people are coming at her hard because of this book. And I guess what I want you to react to, Bianca, is do we think the book really is weak and it's not on message? Or are they being extra hard on her given the current climate and the fact that she is indeed a black woman?
I mean, well, one of the things you said is that she comes after the establishment. So that right there suggests a motive to me to tear her down. But I will tell you this. I did read some of the articles and see some of the commentary. I have not seen her in person, but I will tell you this. I'm not taking anyone's word for it because there are things that we have to overcome to get into spaces that we get into that a lot of other people do not have to contend with. So I'm not taking anyone's word for it. As you said, this was a person who was highly qualified before she got into that role. And I think that speaks for itself.
Yeah, I'll be fair. I did read some of the interview excerpts, and yeah, some of her answers weren't polished or punchy, but that doesn't necessarily mean she's unqualified for her job. I mean, maybe she was just nervous for her first big interview for her book. I think
maybe she was nervous. Maybe, this is her first time speaking without public talking points, and she didn't have staff to prep her the way that folks come across super polished in press releases and everything else. So look, I think that there's a grace that is often extended to others that is not extended to Black women. And this could be a primary example of that, right? Like the criticism that we've seen of folks like Joy-Ann Reid and Ketanji Brown Jackson and Beyonce, right? You can be exceptional as a Black woman and there will still be critique of you that others would not endure.
Exactly. I agree. And actually, the way I view it is it's fair to critique the book because I actually have a lot of questions about some of the things she's advancing in that book. Like, if you had all these problems, why don't you say something about it, right? Like, I think there is a fair discussion that can be had about this book, but I think how we are discussing it has less to do with the messaging in the book and more to do with her performance and how people perceive her to be and this whole DEI narrative.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of watching and reading and merits of books, I started reading Vice President Kamala Harris's book, 107 Days. And I started reading it. I was planning to buy it and support anyway. And I'd had it, but life be lifing and we don't have a lot of time. But I prioritized reading it in part because there's been a lot in the media about it. There've been a lot of clips about it sort of kind of being a tell-all. I saw a review where someone mentioned she's showing her petty. And then there's some insinuations that she might be considering a 2028 run, and folks are suggesting that she has thrown away her chances because of this book in part and some of the things that she's saying publicly. So I picked it up because I really wanted to dig in. And I'm only about 20% in, but I'm wrapped. And I disagree with a lot of the commentary, right? On that piece about, Chris Hayes has an interesting article where he mentioned the fact that part of the Democrats' issue is not messaging, but it's getting their messaging heard because they've been so resistant to being in certain spaces. And Vice President Harris talks about that, right? She talks about some strategic decisions that they made. The days of old of TV ads and, to your point, being polished on stage are over, right? The Generation Alpha that is going to be ready to vote in 2028, they're about real. They're about transparent. They're not about polish. And, everything that Vice President Harris is doing, whether it's on podcasts or in this book, is making her just a tad bit more relatable. No one's watching TV. People ain't paying for cable. People are streaming. People are getting their news from podcasts, from TikTok, from TMZ, right, on Instagram. So there is this need to sort of modernize the way that we're communicating, the way that politicians are communicating with the general public. And Chris Hayes talks about the fact that one of the times he's liked Trump the most was when he appeared on this podcast called Bussing with the Boys and actually spoke really compassionately about his own brother's alcoholism and that struggle, right? I had a moment listening to Erica Kirk. She was talking about her husband, and she was talking about, waking up on his side of the bed and the way he slept because he wore compression socks. My husband wears compression socks for circulation. So it's this little human moment that makes you feel slightly more connected, right? I'm not saying it completely changes your political leanings, but that moment of humanity can resonate. So I think what Vice President Harris is doing is strategic. I think it's brilliant. I do not think that her telling it all is going to eliminate her chances of running or being successful in a run for 2028. I think that she is appealing to Generation Z, Generation Alpha, who very, very quickly are going to be the most powerful decision makers in the country.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. And one of the clips I saw was of Harris discussing her decision not to go on to the Joe Rogan podcast and how, in hindsight, that was a mistake because he has a wide audience. And to your point, sitting, being authentic, being willing to go into the lion's den, so to speak, although Rogan isn't, some hard right MAGA. She probably should have done that. And, kind of relatedly, I heard a very interesting conversation about this very topic about Harris, not necessarily about more authenticity, on the Joe Budden podcast. I've been listening to that a lot more for a variety of reasons, some of which you touched upon, which is, we need to be in all different kinds of spaces.
Yeah.
And Joe Budden's podcast just had a little beef with Native Land's podcast because of that issue, because Mark Lamont Hill, who is a professor, is on the Joe Budden podcast. And I think there's a lot of, not necessarily backlash, but critique. People in academia, or at least folks who consider themselves, intellectuals, are wondering why Mark Lamont Hill is on that podcast. But it's exactly the reason you mentioned, Bianca. It's because we need to be in all different spaces, messaging in all different ways. Yeah. I mean, he got the message a lot sooner than everyone else. But something interesting he said on a recent episode is that he actually doesn't think that Kamala Harris could win in 2028. And the point he made, it wasn't just about this election in 2024. She had run in 2020. Remember when there was a ton of candidates in the field?
Yeah.
And she had a big moment where she talked about busing. So she was getting attention and she failed to gain traction. And, his concern is that she didn't resonate with voters then, and that she didn't resonate with voters this time around. And this time around, she was heir apparent. It's not like voters put her in that role. So he's concerned that it's unwinnable for her. So the conversation, like, is it good strategy? Is she positioning herself for a run, is kind of a different conversation than he was having, which is, I hope she doesn't run because we need to win.
Well,
So
I
don't
think
know
his argument is kind of undermined by the fact that she is gaining some traction and some more likability and resonating with people because of what she's doing right now, because of her book. I would say that she was extremely guarded in 2020. She had that former prosecutor thing hanging over her head. And I want to talk to you about that because as former federal prosecutors, right? When have you ever introduced yourself as a federal prosecutor when we, back in that day, where the first thing someone said is, oh, aren't you tired of putting Black people in jail? I mean, it was like par for the course,
well, unless
right?
we were talking to ourselves. I mean, if we were talking to ourselves, like, we would go to the National Black Prosecutors Association conference.
Right. But my point is that there is this narrative about prosecutors that all you do is these bad things and you lock up people who are poor, who are marginalized. And there's the counter to that, which is there are a lot of victims who are poor and marginalized, who are harmed, and they are getting vindicated by the work of prosecutors. But even more importantly than that, prosecutors, as Michelle Alexander said in her book, The New Jim Crow, and I don't think anyone who understands how the criminal legal system works would disagree, prosecutors hold the keys to the jailhouse door, right? The prosecutors decide what to charge, whether to charge, what the plea should be, whether there should be a plea. And when I wrote my book, Prosecutor, a memoir and blueprint for prosecutor-led criminal justice reform, one of the things I was, what'd you say?
She's preaching.
Listen, I'm cooking, don't interrupt. But when I wrote that book, one of my goals was to change the narrative around prosecution because there are people who legitimately are out there saying that good people cannot and should not be prosecutors. Imagine a world where good people are not prosecutors, right? Holistically. And I want to change that narrative. And I think that narrative really impacted Kamala Harris back, at her first presidential run and to a degree in this one, because even Black people don't understand the ability of prosecutors to do good, not just because of the fact that they are protecting the community, but because of the fact that they can offer empathy and they can understand and empathize with the needs of the community. I mean, think about when I was in the office, one of the things we did was we started to really tackle some of the challenges that we were seeing in rebuilding trust with the community. So I think that's a narrative, and I'm curious about your thoughts on that, but I think that's a narrative that we really need to work to change.
I think that is a whole nother episode because I have a lot of thoughts. My high level is I completely agree with you. I think it is a multifaceted problem because, in speaking to people on the defense side, they appreciate our position there. And I think, I have a lot of friends now that are like true friends who were public defenders at the time. And, even though they saw me as a person, I think if you asked them, I hope they would say I'm a good person. They still disagreed with my choice to participate in a system that they saw as inherently unfair and just irredeemably broken. And so their position was, you're part of the problem if you are a part of the system. I'm not saying that's right.
Sure.
I'm saying I think that's the viewpoint of many. Like, why aren't you with us, sis, trying to burn it all down instead of being complicit as a part of it? Like, I would rather you be on my side than trying to help from within. So it's a really tough issue. But I think what I'm hearing here, though, Bianca, is that Madam Vice President needs to pick up a copy of your book to continue her strategy with making inroads to everybody, to these various populations, and perhaps, helping her spin a more relatable narrative about her time as a prosecutor and why it's really a positive rather than a negative. That's what I think.
Sure. And I don't think the goal is to craft a message that resonates with everyone universally, right? I think that you can please some of the people all the time and all the people some of the time, but you can't please all the people all the time, right?
I don't know. Donald Trump's base, I'm just going to push back there, Bianca. Donald Trump seems to have crafted messages that universally resonate with his entire base. I think this is the problem again. Yes, I'm sorry. I think we do need to start crafting messaging that resonates with an entire base. This is the issue. It's too fractured right now. The Democrats, like, some are this, some are progressives, some are moderates, some are this, some are that. And there's nothing cohesive bringing the people together. What the right has done so successfully is platformed certain issues that for this group of thinkers, for this group of people, resonates very universally. Now, of course, there are some discrete issues that some people take exceptions to, but for the most part, the big issues are big issues for everyone. And I do not think that the Democrats are doing that successfully. So this is a smaller conversation. Like, we're talking about a very narrow issue about a very niche topic, but to me, I think it is kind of emblematic of the larger issue, which is, who are we talking to? Why are we talking to them?
Yeah.
What kind of messaging do we want to get out there? And do we want to tackle these niche things, or do we want to try to bring it up to a level that everybody can understand so we can all get on the same page?
I think the problem is, right, when you talk about messaging, some people are burdened by truth and some people are not, right? So I think that there are probably elements of MAGA messaging that do resonate. Whether they're based in fact is a different question. I think it's harder for folks who lean Democratic to come up with moderate messaging, to come up with consistent messaging, because
Why?
I do think
Why is that hard?
space, I do think that space is more moderate. I think it's harder because it's less, because on the right there tends to be this extremism, again, unburdened by the truth in a lot of instances, and the Democrats have not been the party of misrepresentation. So I think it's harder, if you want to stick to facts, to create a campaign of messaging that will resonate across the board. But I agree with you. Because, again, watching sort of the Turning Point movement, it's sort of amazing, this message that they've been able to sort of create that resonates across, within the upcoming generation of voters. And when I look at that, the thing that I ask is, where is that? Where are the Democrats doing that? When you look at Project 2025, the strategic long game report, where are the Democrats doing that? And it's not that there is one message that resonates across the entire base for Trump. There are a couple of messages that resonate with enough people.
That's
right.
Well,
that has given him traction.
Well, yes, but I think that for the at least the folks I've spoken to, because I've been speaking to a lot of different MAGA voters, I think this is when I say bring it up high. So I'll give immigration, for example, right? Most folks that I know who voted for Donald Trump believe that immigration is a problem. What breaks down, right, is then how are we going to tackle it? They all agree that we had an immigration crisis and that there were too many undocumented people in the United States, and it was burdensome overall, right? Now, when it breaks down, when I ask some voters, do you think that ICE should be doing what they're doing right now, taking aggressive tactics to even stop U.S. citizens, quite frankly, but just to stop people on the streets, throw them into jail without due process? I know folks who voted for Trump who's like, no, that's not right. That's not what I wanted, right? But they did agree they wanted something done. It's just they're disagreeing with the method, but the actual message, there are too many immigrants in this country and we need to do something about it, that resonated across. Same thing with crime. We as a society have gotten too comfortable with crime. There's too much crime, right? All the folks I talked to also agreed with that stance. So this is what I'm saying. There are high-level platform points that I actually disagree, Bianca. I actually think that the Democratic base could all get on board saying, we agree with this thing, but then it is like the method of implementation that you would have the differentiation, because you're going to have some people that want to take more radical stances, the framework would be different. But we don't need to talk about that. And that's where you're saying, like, yes, I agree that the right is untethered from the truth and facts in some instances, but sometimes they don't even need to be untethered because they're not giving any details about how they're going to get stuff done. They're seizing on folks' emotions. Fears. And I'm not saying that Democrats need to be seizing on fears and exploiting people's vulnerabilities, but I do think that Democrats need to do a better job understanding what it is that is truly bothering the American voter. And the reality is, with the inflation where it was in 2024, in 2023, when we were going into the election, people's number one issue was not the threat to democracy. Because again, a lot of people don't understand why what is happening now could be an existential threat to democracy. I want to say could be, again, because we're seeing how this plays out. It appears it is. They don't understand that. What they understand is they can't afford groceries.
Right.
And we weren't speaking to that. And in being defensive, in defending Joe Biden's record, in trying to have these nuanced conversations about how inflation could be worse and how they were decreasing inflation, the reality is that was not being felt by American consumers. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about at the Democrats. They outsmart themselves. And I don't say we because I'm not a Democrat, Bianca. I'm actually an independent. I've been an independent.
I'm actually independent as well.
Yeah, I've been an independent my entire life. So the problem is they're not talking about those things or in a way that resonates. And I don't think
that's
that
the part.
Untethered from facts. I think that is just being out of touch with regular people and trying to have academic conversations constantly in spaces that don't warrant it.
I disagree. So here's the thing, right? You use this phrase academic, but a lot of the times academic, what you hear come out as academic is based on data. And data means it actually happened, and that's why it should drive what happens in the future. But aside from that, I don't think that Democrats are not saying the right things. Again, I think it comes down to maybe how they are saying it and where they are saying it. When you think about Donald Trump, the reason why he's all over the media is because he is completely unfiltered, right? His messaging is coming out because he has a good soundbite and it's everywhere, right? The media is promoting it because it gets them view because they want the clickbait, right? So that's a whole other conversation about how the media, the messaging that the media is choosing to amplify. And then when you think about how people are getting their news and it's social media, think about the algorithms. Every time you like something or promote something, it moves it up. More people see it. So I disagree. I do not think that the Dems are not talking about the things that people care about, because if you look back at Kamala Harris's debate against Donald Trump, she was talking about jobs. She was talking about prices. She was talking about things that the average American worker cares about.
Talking about it in an accessible way. And this is where I'm going to push back.
I will hit you there. And that's where we started, right?
But here's the thing. But I'm trying to be very careful here. Those were things they were talking about, but she was also defending Biden's legacy. It's very hard when you're the incumbent. It's very, very hard. Okay. And this is what I'm saying about academic, because we're sitting here she was sitting there and explaining why inflation was going to be reduced, right? Why I can't remember the exact talking point, but I think that the overall messaging was it's not out of control, right? That's that was driven by data. Okay. However, that doesn't mean it was back to a level that the average American consumer was feeling comfortable with. That is what I'm telling you. The difference between having academic discussions where we're like, this is a data-driven approach. Here's what the statistics say. Here's where we are. I'm like, all of that is great. Why is chicken $10? So we weren't talking about that. And I also think there were some areas that we weren't talking about, or they weren't talking about in, I don't want to say an honest way. I think it was honest, but in a way that was appreciating the reality of a lot of people. One of that is immigration. Before the election, I had a conversation with a Black female who was an Army veteran, who was not somebody you would consider MAGA, who lived in the Chicago area, and said, because I was pushing back, I'm like, these are all talking points. And she's like, they aren't talking points. She's like, our streets are flooded by migrants, because I think, and I need this fact check, but I remember certain cities were having migrants bust to them from the
they were sanctuary cities for a bunch of
So there was an influx of people that wasn't ordinary, right? It was by design. But I think what the Southwestern states would say is, this is what we're dealing with. Now you can feel what we're dealing with. So they were on the streets. And what she was explaining to me is, number one, there's so many just homeless people on the streets, but they are also receiving services because there is this crisis. They're getting food. They're getting shelter. She said, I can barely support my son. She's a single mother. I don't qualify. She's right there on the line where she doesn't qualify for government assistance. Prices are sky high. And now she's seeing people who cross the border illegally, which is the reality, and they're receiving some kind of assistance. It is a nuanced conversation, and we can talk about the reasons why folks cross that way, why we should have more immigration quotas so it doesn't need to be that way in the first place, why we should make social safety nets, the programs, expand them to bring in more families. Those are the kinds of conversations that Democrats are having. But this lady is like, y'all can have your conversation. I can't feed my baby. Donald Trump is telling me he's going to do something about this. So at least the money I am paying as a taxpayer is not going to fund this. That sounds pretty good to me. And we don't have a good counter narrative to that.
Sure. I mean, I would like to dig in a little bit more to the types of benefits that she's saying that migrant workers are getting.
Bianca, this is the point. That's what I'm saying. Wait, I want to stop.
Right?
That's the point. That's the problem. You want to have a nuanced conversation where we sit down.
Because I want it to make sense. You can't tell me,
this is the part.
But you can't tell me that because the migrant worker can go to a shelter and get dinner, that they're somehow taking away from her ability to feed her son.
That's the point, Bianca. That's the point. This is the point. Listen to me. The point is, at this time, it doesn't need to make sense to the voter because they don't have the time to untangle it. I agree with you. This is what I'm saying. There are explanations, but when you have somebody who is like in an acute situation of poverty and they're seeing this, they just want, it's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They don't want to hear it. They don't want to figure it out. They just want dinner on their table.
Yeah.
And how, in an honest way, can Democrats counter that narrative and offer solutions that people can understand and aren't slow to scale and implement that will actually benefit people quicker?
Yeah. I mean, I think one clear way is like, usually you have Democrats supporting some of the childcare subsidies, right? Or different educational programs that, by the way, have just been cut, right? Free lunch in certain schools. So I think the issue, I think the place where you and I align is it's the way that the messaging is being communicated. It is not as accessible as it needs to be. And it is not, it's not accessible in terms of language and it's not accessible in terms of platform, right? So that's where I think that's where the disconnect is. I think we agree there.
Well, we've just solved the Democrats' problem, so I hope all of them are listening to this. The DNC, we've just given you the blueprint for 2028.
You got it.
You're all welcome because you just given it to you two independents have just given it to you. So, all right. So to close us out today, Bianca, what's your plug? What's your plug of the week?
Yeah, Hurricane Melissa, I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with this devastating hurricane and its impact in the Caribbean, especially Haiti and Jamaica. The death toll has continued to rise. And if you're in a position to give, I just want to highlight a couple of organizations. Walk Good Jamaica, which, fun fact, was founded by Cheryl Lee Ralph's son. They're of Jamaica heritage. Really fun fact, Cheryl Lee Ralph's father taught me piano for about 10 years. Aww. Rest his soul, bless his heart, Dr. Ralph. And then the other one is Hope for Haiti. So if you're in a position to give, we would ask that you do that.
Okay, please see that you do. I mean, the situation is devastating, and those sound like some phenomenal organizations. So with that, thank you all for joining another episode. Of course, go ahead and click that like button, subscribe, and we will be back to you next week with more.